The Egyptian desert stretches endlessly, a sea of golden sand rippling under the scorching sun. In the distance, the towering pyramids rise like silent sentinels, guardians of a civilization that has stood for millennia. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of them all, casts a long shadow over the land, a reminder of Egypt's ancient glory. The Nile River, lifeblood of the kingdom, gleams like a silver thread winding through the arid landscape, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a people. Birds circle above the palm trees, and the warm breeze carries the scent of the river, mixed with the spices of the bustling markets. In the heart of Alexandria, Egypt's vibrant capital, stands the royal palace, a sprawling complex of marble and limestone, where towering columns support ornate roofs decorated with the symbols of the gods. Inside, the air is thick with tension. At the center of the royal court sits Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for answers. She is dressed in a robe of shimmering gold, her head crowned with a diadem, symbolizing both her divine right to rule and the heavy burden of leadership. The weight of her decision presses down on her. For today, Cleopatra must choose the path that will determine the fate of her kingdom. With Rome closing in on Egypt's borders, the stakes could not be higher. It is the 1st century BC, and Egypt, once the world's most powerful empire, is now a shadow of its former self. The Ptolemaic dynasty, of which Cleopatra is a descendant, has ruled for nearly 3 centuries. However, political turmoil, internal strife, and the relentless advance of the Roman Empire have weakened the kingdom. Cleopatra, now in her 20s, has taken the throne alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, but their relationship is fraught with conflict. Civil war looms on the horizon. Beyond Egypt's borders, the might of Rome is growing. The Republic, once a proud democracy, is in the midst of its own power struggle. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, is embroiled in a civil war with Pompey, a former ally turned rival. The Roman legions march across the Mediterranean, and soon, their gaze will turn to Egypt, a land of untold wealth and strategic importance. Cleopatra knows that if Egypt is to survive, she must navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. But how can a young queen, isolated and surrounded by enemies, stand against the greatest empire the world has ever known? Cleopatra's reign is defined not only by her ambition but also by her ability to forge alliances with the most powerful men of her time. Her intelligence and political acumen will prove invaluable, but the question remains, will it be enough? As we delve into the life of Cleopatra, the question that lingers is not only how she ruled but how she faced down the greatest empire of her age. What decisions did she make that changed the course of history? How did she, a queen born into a dynasty in decline, manage to become a legend whose name is still spoken with awe and reverence today? And perhaps the greatest mystery of all, how did her life, so full of promise, end in tragedy? Throughout this journey, we will uncover the hidden truths behind Cleopatra's alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, her bold strategies to protect her kingdom, and the personal sacrifices she made along the way. But beware, for Cleopatra's story is one of power and betrayal, love and loss, and ultimately, a descent into darkness. The final chapter of her life holds a secret that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the Queen of the Nile. Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BC into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt for almost 300 years since the time of Alexander the Great. From a young age, she was immersed in the political complexities of a kingdom constantly under threat, both from internal family feuds and the looming power of Rome. At just 18 years old, Cleopatra ascended to the throne, initially co-ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, as was the custom of the time. But this co-regency quickly devolved into a struggle for absolute power, a conflict that Cleopatra, with her wit and resolve, was determined to win. From the outset, Cleopatra distinguished herself not only as a ruler but also as an intellectual. Unlike her Ptolemaic predecessors, she embraced Egyptian culture, adopting Egyptian customs and presenting herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis, further strengthening her bond with her people. Her most striking attributes were her intelligence and political shrewdness. She spoke multiple languages, including Greek, Egyptian, and likely Latin, allowing her to communicate with foreign dignitaries and win the loyalty of her subjects without the need for intermediaries. Cleopatra was also known for her charm, not in the superficial sense often depicted in popular culture, but in her ability to forge powerful alliances, persuading even the most hardened political players to see things her way. More than a beautiful face, Cleopatra was a master of statecraft and diplomacy, using her charisma to sway hearts and minds. Cleopatra's relationship with Julius Caesar was far more than a romantic affair. It was a calculated and strategic alliance. At the time, Caesar was the most powerful man in Rome, embroiled in a civil war with his rival Pompey. When Cleopatra was forced into exile during her struggle for power against her brother, she saw Caesar as her key to regaining control of Egypt. Legend has it that Cleopatra smuggled herself into Caesar's quarters rolled up in a carpet, a daring move that immediately captured the Roman general's attention. Their alliance was mutually beneficial. Cleopatra needed Caesar's military support to reclaim her throne, and Caesar saw in Cleopatra a way to secure Egypt's vast wealth and grain supplies for Rome. Their partnership resulted in the birth of a son, Caesarion, whom Cleopatra hoped would secure her dynasty's future by linking it to Rome. Cleopatra's time with Caesar was pivotal in re-establishing her rule over Egypt and solidifying her place as a key player on the global stage. But when Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, Cleopatra's fortunes took a sharp turn, thrusting her into the next phase of her political life. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra's political strategy shifted. The Roman Republic was plunged into chaos, with two main contenders vying for power: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most trusted generals. Cleopatra saw an opportunity in Antony, a man known for his military prowess and larger-than-life persona. Their relationship would become one of history's most famous romances, yet it was also deeply political. Cleopatra needed Antony's military protection to keep Egypt independent, and Antony needed Cleopatra's vast resources to fund his campaigns in the East. Their partnership was passionate and powerful. Together, they sought to establish a new world order, one in which Rome and Egypt would rule together. They even went so far as to declare Cleopatra's son Caesarion as Julius Caesar's legitimate heir, challenging Octavian's claim to the Roman throne. But this alliance made them enemies of Rome, and ultimately, their fates became intertwined in a war against Octavian, which would end in tragedy. Antony's downfall became Cleopatra's, and their story culminated in the defeat at the Battle of Actium, forever cementing their legacy as star-crossed lovers whose ambition outstripped their reach. Cleopatra's story is often painted in broad strokes, either as a cunning seductress or a ruthless queen. But beneath the political maneuvering and power plays, Cleopatra was a woman of deep complexity, driven by a profound sense of responsibility and ambition. She was not just a figure of history but a person with doubts, fears, and aspirations. Her reign was filled with difficult choices, whether to align with Rome or stand alone, whether to risk her personal happiness for the future of her kingdom, and whether to continue fighting even as the odds turned against her. Despite her immense power, Cleopatra was haunted by the fragility of her position. She was acutely aware that her status as queen was contingent upon the whims of far more powerful men. First Caesar, then Antony, and finally, the Roman Senate. Every decision she made carried the weight of Egypt's survival, and she bore that burden with courage, even as she faced betrayal, loss, and the inevitability of Rome's domination. Cleopatra's ambition was not for herself alone. She sought to preserve the independence of Egypt and secure a future for her son, Caesarion. Cleopatra's emotional depth is perhaps most evident in the final chapter of her life. As the walls of Alexandria closed in and Rome's legions prepared to overrun her kingdom, Cleopatra faced a choice: surrender and be paraded through the streets of Rome as a captive, or die on her own terms, as the last true ruler of Egypt. In choosing the latter, Cleopatra cemented her legacy as a ruler who would rather die a queen than live as a prisoner. A woman who, until the very end, fought for her kingdom, her family, and her honor. The city of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great and the beating heart of Cleopatra's Egypt, was one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. Picture this: as the camera pans over the shimmering blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea, the grand city comes into view, its marble buildings gleaming under the golden sunlight. The skyline is dominated by the great lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, standing as a colossal beacon for sailors navigating the treacherous waters. This lighthouse, towering nearly 100 meters above the harbor, symbolizes the city's prominence as a thriving hub of trade and culture, where East meets West. Moving deeper into the city, the scene shifts to the Royal Palace, a sprawling complex of white marble and limestone, surrounded by lush gardens and fountains. The palace is a blend of Greek elegance and Egyptian grandeur, with towering columns carved with hieroglyphs and statues of the gods guarding every entrance. Inside, the palace is a world of opulence. Polished floors of alabaster, rich tapestries, and ceilings painted with scenes from Egyptian mythology. Cleopatra's throne room is the very embodiment of power, a space where the fate of nations is decided. Here, Cleopatra, robed in gold and jewels, presides over her court, a figure both revered and feared. Nearby, the Library of Alexandria stands as the intellectual heart of the ancient world. Imagine a massive structure, its towering walls adorned with carvings of philosophers and scholars, housing scrolls and texts from every corner of the known world. The library is not just a repository of knowledge, but a symbol of Cleopatra's vision for Egypt, a land that marries the ancient traditions of the pharaohs with the intellectual and cultural achievements of Greece. In this great library, scholars debate philosophy, astronomy, and the mysteries of the universe, all under the patronage of Cleopatra, whose reign symbolizes the golden age of Alexandria. Within the walls of Alexandria, life at court is a spectacle of luxury and excess. Cleopatra's court is a vibrant mixture of Egyptian and Greek customs, filled with the sounds of musicians, the aroma of exotic spices, and the presence of noblemen and women draped in fine silks and adorned with precious jewels. Banquets are held in grand halls where diplomats from distant lands dine on rare delicacies, sipping wine from golden cups while discussing matters of state and trade. The court is a place of refined elegance, where Cleopatra herself is the center of attention, radiating both charm and authority. Every move she makes is watched closely, every word spoken carries weight, for this court is not just a symbol of Egyptian power but the focal point of diplomatic intrigue. Yet, this facade of luxury is tinged with an ever-present sense of danger. Just beyond the borders of Egypt, the Roman Empire looms like a storm on the horizon. Cleopatra is well aware that Egypt's wealth and resources, its grain, gold, and strategic location, make it a prize coveted by the rulers of Rome. The threat of invasion is constant, and the decisions made within the palace's gilded halls often carry the heavy burden of life and death, not just for Cleopatra but for her entire kingdom. As Rome's power grows, the luxurious life of the Egyptian court becomes more fragile, a beautiful illusion that could shatter at any moment. Under Cleopatra's rule, Egypt experienced a period of relative prosperity, both economically and culturally. Cleopatra's Egypt was a land of great wealth, thanks in large part to the fertile banks of the Nile River, which provided bountiful harvests of grain, a key export that fed much of the Mediterranean world. Egypt's economy thrived on trade, with Alexandria acting as a major port connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. Caravans loaded with spices, textiles, and precious metals moved through the city's bustling markets, where traders haggled over goods and sailors from every corner of the ancient world gathered to exchange news and stories. Culturally, Cleopatra's reign was a fusion of Greek and Egyptian traditions. The Ptolemaic dynasty, of which Cleopatra was the last, was of Greek origin, having ruled Egypt since the conquest of Alexander the Great. Yet Cleopatra was unique among her ancestors in that she embraced the Egyptian language and customs, presenting herself as a true pharaoh to her people. This cultural blending was evident in the art and architecture of the time. The temples of Egypt continued to honor the ancient gods, with massive statues of Osiris, Isis, and Horus standing sentinel over the land. At the same time, Alexandria was a city steeped in Greek philosophy, literature, and science, a beacon of Hellenistic culture. Cleopatra herself was a patron of the arts and sciences, and during her reign, Alexandria remained the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers gathered in the city, engaging in debates and making discoveries that would influence generations to come. Cleopatra's court was not only a center of political power but also a gathering place for the brightest minds of the age, a testament to her vision of Egypt as both a cultural and economic powerhouse. However, life in Egypt was not without its challenges. The constant threat of Rome cast a shadow over the kingdom, and Cleopatra's efforts to secure Egypt's independence through her alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were fraught with danger. Though the streets of Alexandria were filled with wealth and culture, the specter of war loomed ever closer, threatening to unravel the prosperity Cleopatra had worked so hard to maintain. In this complex environment, Cleopatra's reign stood as a delicate balancing act. She was a ruler who understood the importance of image and power, both at home and abroad. As the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra walked a fine line between maintaining the splendor of her court and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Rome, a battle that would ultimately determine the fate of her kingdom. The heart of Cleopatra's story lies in her fierce determination to preserve Egypt's independence in the face of Rome's ever-expanding empire. By the time Cleopatra ascended to the throne, Rome had already begun encroaching on Egypt's sphere of influence. The Ptolemaic dynasty, while still nominally in power, had become heavily dependent on Roman favor to maintain its sovereignty. Cleopatra, aware of this precarious position, recognized that Egypt's survival depended on her ability to navigate the complex and dangerous political landscape dominated by Rome. Her strategy to protect Egypt was rooted in forming personal and political alliances with Rome's most powerful men. Cleopatra understood that Egypt, despite its wealth, was no match for Rome's military might. Therefore, she sought to align herself with Julius Caesar, the most influential leader of the Roman Republic at the time. Their alliance was not only personal, marked by the birth of their son, Caesarion, but also deeply political. Cleopatra offered Caesar access to Egypt's vast resources, while Caesar provided Cleopatra with the military support she needed to solidify her claim to the throne amid internal turmoil. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra found herself once again needing to secure Egypt's future. She turned to another Roman power player, Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most trusted generals. Their relationship, much like Cleopatra's with Caesar, was based on mutual benefit. Antony, locked in a power struggle with Octavian for control of Rome, needed Cleopatra's wealth to fund his military campaigns. In return, Cleopatra needed Antony's protection to ensure that Egypt would remain independent. Together, they formed an alliance that was as much political as it was romantic, standing as a bulwark against the rising influence of Octavian. The political landscape after Julius Caesar's death was chaotic and fraught with danger for Cleopatra. The power vacuum left by Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into civil war, with various factions vying for control. Cleopatra, far from Rome, had to carefully navigate these dangerous waters. Her relationship with Caesar had secured Egypt's independence temporarily, but with his death, she knew her position was far from secure. The alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony, while strategic, also exacerbated the political tensions within Rome. Antony's growing relationship with Cleopatra became a source of scandal and outrage among the Roman elite, particularly for Octavian, who portrayed Cleopatra as a manipulative foreign queen seeking to corrupt and control Antony. This portrayal stoked anti-Egyptian sentiment in Rome, with Octavian positioning himself as the defender of Roman values against the perceived threat of an Eastern monarchy. Cleopatra's and Antony's decision to proclaim Caesarion as Julius Caesar's legitimate heir only heightened these tensions. Octavian, who considered himself the rightful successor to Caesar, saw this move as a direct challenge to his authority. The political machinations in Rome culminated in a propaganda war, with Octavian painting Antony and Cleopatra as traitors to Rome, bent on creating an Eastern empire that would rival the Roman Republic. The culmination of these political tensions came to a head at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, one of the most decisive naval battles in ancient history. On one side stood Cleopatra and Mark Antony, commanding a combined fleet of Egyptian and Roman ships. On the other side was Octavian, who had marshaled his forces for a final showdown to determine the future of the Roman world. The stakes could not have been higher. For Cleopatra, this battle represented her last chance to secure Egypt's independence. For Antony, it was a fight for his survival and his claim to power in Rome. The atmosphere before the battle was tense, with both sides knowing that the outcome would determine not just their personal fates but the fate of Egypt and the Roman Republic. As the battle unfolded in the waters off the coast of Greece, Antony and Cleopatra's forces were initially evenly matched against Octavian's fleet. However, as the fighting progressed, it became clear that Octavian's forces had the upper hand. Cleopatra, realizing that defeat was imminent, made a fateful decision. She ordered her fleet to break off and retreat to Egypt, a move that has been interpreted by some historians as a betrayal of Antony, though others suggest it was a tactical decision aimed at preserving Egypt's forces for a future battle. Antony, upon seeing Cleopatra's fleet withdraw, was thrown into despair. He abandoned the fight and followed her, leaving the remainder of his forces to be decisively defeated by Octavian. The Battle of Actium marked the end of Antony and Cleopatra's resistance. With their forces decimated, the couple retreated to Alexandria, where they would face the final act of their lives. In the wake of their defeat, Antony and Cleopatra's situation became increasingly dire. Octavian marched on Alexandria, and as his forces closed in, Antony and Cleopatra were left with few options. Rather than face the humiliation of being captured and paraded through the streets of Rome as spoils of war, both chose to end their lives on their own terms. Antony, despondent and believing Cleopatra had already committed suicide, fell on his sword. Cleopatra, realizing that her time had come, famously allowed herself to be bitten by an asp, a symbolic and dramatic end to a life filled with power, passion, and political intrigue. The death of Cleopatra marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the final chapter of Egypt's independence. Octavian annexed Egypt as a Roman province, bringing an end to its centuries-long history as a sovereign kingdom. With Cleopatra's death, the Roman Empire was solidified under Octavian, who would soon become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Cleopatra's legacy, however, would endure for centuries, not only as a symbol of Egypt's last queen but also as a figure who dared to challenge the might of Rome in a bid to preserve her nation's sovereignty. This ultimate conflict between Cleopatra, Mark Antony, and Rome is a testament to the high stakes of political ambition, the complexity of personal relationships entangled with power, and the far-reaching consequences of their choices. Cleopatra's life, marked by brilliant political maneuvering and tragic downfall, stands as a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and fate. Cleopatra's reign was not just defined by her political alliances and military strategies. It was also deeply rooted in the religious and mythological traditions of ancient Egypt. From the beginning of her rule, Cleopatra presented herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, one of the most revered deities in Egyptian mythology. Isis was the goddess of motherhood, magic, and fertility, but she was also the protector of the pharaohs and the kingdom. By associating herself with Isis, Cleopatra was not only aligning herself with a powerful divine figure but also reinforcing her legitimacy as the rightful ruler of Egypt. Cleopatra's identification with Isis was a calculated move to solidify her connection to both the Egyptian people and the religious traditions that had sustained the country for millennia. Throughout her reign, Cleopatra was depicted in temple carvings and statues wearing the headdress of Isis, an image that linked her directly to the goddess. In this role, she was not just a political leader but a religious figure who was believed to possess divine wisdom and power. For the Egyptian populace, this association reinforced the idea that Cleopatra's rule was ordained by the gods, making her authority both unquestionable and sacred. She became more than a queen. She was a divine protector of Egypt, destined to preserve its prosperity and independence. Cleopatra's portrayal as a divine figure also served to distinguish her reign from those of her Ptolemaic predecessors. While earlier Ptolemies had largely maintained their Greek cultural identity, Cleopatra embraced Egyptian religion and symbolism more fully, presenting herself as a pharaoh in the traditional sense. This not only earned her the loyalty of the Egyptian people but also strengthened her position in a time when Egypt's independence was increasingly threatened by Rome. By embodying the qualities of Isis, Cleopatra symbolized fertility, regeneration, and the eternal strength of Egypt itself. While Cleopatra was revered in Egypt as the living embodiment of Isis, her image in Rome was starkly different. To the Romans, Cleopatra was an enigma, seductive, manipulative, and dangerous. Roman writers and propagandists, especially those loyal to Octavian, crafted an image of Cleopatra that was meant to instill fear and revulsion among the Roman populace. She was portrayed as a foreign queen who used her beauty and charm to corrupt Rome's greatest men, first Julius Caesar and then Mark Antony. In Roman propaganda, Cleopatra became the archetype of the femme fatale, a figure who wielded her sexuality like a weapon to achieve political power. Octavian's campaign against Mark Antony and Cleopatra leaned heavily on this portrayal, painting Antony as a man who had been bewitched by Cleopatra's foreign, Eastern allure. The fear of a powerful woman controlling a Roman general played into long-standing Roman anxieties about the influence of foreign cultures and the perceived decadence of the East. Cleopatra, with her opulent court, luxurious lifestyle, and association with ancient Egyptian mysticism, became a symbol of everything that was seen as corrupt and alien to Roman values. Moreover, Cleopatra's claim that her son, Caesarion, was the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar posed a direct threat to Octavian's claim to power. This further fueled the Roman perception of Cleopatra as a dangerous figure, someone who could potentially usurp Roman authority and install her own dynasty in Rome. Octavian's portrayal of Cleopatra was designed not only to vilify her but also to galvanize Roman support for his final confrontation with Antony and Cleopatra. By casting Cleopatra as the villainous seductress, Octavian justified his actions and solidified his position as Rome's future emperor. Cleopatra's life, especially her relationship with Mark Antony, is often seen as mirroring the tragic figures of Greek mythology. In many ways, their story unfolds like a classical Greek tragedy, where fate and the gods play an inescapable role in the downfall of the protagonists. From the beginning of their relationship, there was a sense of inevitability, a feeling that their passionate alliance, both romantic and political, was destined to end in disaster. In the eyes of many, Cleopatra and Antony were like figures out of a mythological story, larger than life, flawed, and ultimately doomed by their own ambitions and desires. Antony, like many tragic heroes, was a man torn between his duty to Rome and his love for Cleopatra. His decision to align himself with Cleopatra and Egypt, abandoning his Roman roots, can be seen as his fatal flaw, his hamartia. This, combined with Cleopatra's own ambition to secure Egypt's independence, set them both on a collision course with Octavian's Rome, which viewed their partnership as a direct threat to the stability of the Republic. In Greek tragedy, the concept of hubris, excessive pride or defiance of the gods, is often the downfall of the hero. For Antony and Cleopatra, their hubris lay in their belief that they could defy the political and military might of Rome, and in their attempt to create an Eastern empire that rivaled the power of the West. Their decision to openly challenge Octavian's authority, especially through their declaration of Caesarion as the true heir of Julius Caesar, sealed their fate. In the end, like the tragic figures of Greek drama, Antony and Cleopatra could not escape the consequences of their actions. Their defeat at the Battle of Actium and their subsequent suicides marked the final act in a story that seemed, from the start, to be predestined for a tragic end. Cleopatra's death, in particular, is steeped in symbolic meaning. Her decision to die by the bite of an asp, a venomous snake, is not only a nod to her association with Isis, who was often depicted with serpents, but also a dramatic mythic conclusion to her life. In choosing to end her own life rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome as a captive, Cleopatra ensured that her legacy would be one of dignity and defiance. Much like the heroines of Greek tragedy, she chose to meet her fate on her own terms, solidifying her place in history as a complex, powerful, and ultimately tragic figure. The story of Cleopatra, like the myths of old, has transcended time. Her life is a blend of political intrigue, romance, and tragedy, forever etched in the annals of history as one of the most captivating and enigmatic tales of the ancient world. Through her association with the divine, her manipulation of Roman perceptions, and the tragic nature of her downfall, Cleopatra's legacy continues to evoke the timeless themes of power, ambition, and fate. It is September 2, 31 BC, and the sun rises over the Ionian Sea, casting a golden light on the calm waters near the western coast of Greece. The stage is set for one of the most decisive naval battles in history, the Battle of Actium. On one side of the conflict stands the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the last hope for the Eastern Alliance to maintain power. Their fleet is vast, consisting of more than 500 ships, including Cleopatra's Egyptian vessels, which are some of the largest and most formidable in the ancient world. Antony and Cleopatra's camp is tense but hopeful, their forces ready to face Octavian's navy, led by the brilliant General Agrippa, whose tactical genius would prove decisive. As the battle begins, the ships from both sides maneuver cautiously in the waters. Octavian's fleet, though smaller, is composed of lighter and more agile ships. In contrast, Antony's forces rely on the size and strength of their heavily armed galleys, many of which are outfitted with massive bronze rams and filled with soldiers ready to board enemy vessels. For hours, the two sides engage in a complex and brutal dance of strategy, clashing ship against ship. The sounds of battle echo across the sea, the clash of metal, the cries of soldiers, and the groaning of wooden ships breaking under the force of impact. Despite Antony's determination, the tide of battle slowly begins to shift in favor of Octavian. Agrippa's clever tactics isolate sections of Antony's fleet, cutting off reinforcements and exploiting weaknesses in their formation. Cleopatra, observing from her flagship, sees that the situation is deteriorating. In a critical moment, with the battle hanging in the balance, Cleopatra makes a fateful decision. She orders her fleet to break away from the battle and retreat back to Egypt. The massive Egyptian ships, with their billowing sails, begin to pull away from the fight, a retreat that shocks Antony and his men. Witnessing Cleopatra's withdrawal, Antony is thrown into despair. He abandons his command, follows her retreat, and leaves his forces in disarray. As Antony flees the battlefield to follow Cleopatra, his fleet is left vulnerable. Octavian's forces seize the opportunity and destroy or capture many of Antony's ships. The battle, though fierce, ends with a decisive victory for Octavian. The defeat at Actium seals the fate of Antony and Cleopatra's ambitions. It is a turning point not only for the war but for the entire ancient world. With Antony and Cleopatra's forces in ruins, Octavian solidifies his control over Rome and the Mediterranean. The fall of Antony and Cleopatra marks the beginning of the end for Egypt as an independent power. Following the defeat at Actium, Antony and Cleopatra return to Alexandria, their future hanging by a thread. The mood is one of despair and finality. Cleopatra retreats to her palace, where she fortifies herself within the luxurious, yet increasingly desolate, walls of her kingdom. The knowledge that Octavian's legions are marching towards Egypt weighs heavily on her. She knows that Rome will not be merciful, and there will be no peace. Rumors spread quickly. Word reaches Alexandria that Antony, believing Cleopatra to be dead, has fallen on his sword in a moment of tragic misunderstanding. Mortally wounded, Antony is brought to Cleopatra, who, heartbroken, holds him as he dies in her arms. The weight of their failure and the loss of her beloved Antony is crushing. But Cleopatra still has one final choice to make. As Octavian closes in, Cleopatra contemplates her options. She knows that if she surrenders, she will be paraded through the streets of Rome as a symbol of Octavian's triumph, a humiliation she cannot bear. Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, would rather die on her own terms than live as a prisoner of Rome. In one of the most famous and symbolic acts in history, Cleopatra arranges her death with careful deliberation. According to legend, she has a basket of figs brought to her, hidden within it a small but deadly asp, a symbol of royalty and divine power in ancient Egypt. Cleopatra, adorned in her regal attire, lies down among her treasures and prepares to meet her fate. As she holds the asp to her skin, she feels the sharp sting of its bite. Death is slow but certain, the venom working its way through her body, paralyzing her limbs and slowing her breath. Cleopatra dies with dignity, as the last pharaoh of Egypt, a ruler who defied the might of Rome to the very end. Cleopatra's death is not just the end of her life, it is the symbolic end of an era. The fall of Cleopatra marks the final chapter in the story of ancient Egypt's independence. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt had stood as one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in the world. Cleopatra's reign, though brief in the grand sweep of history, had been the last flicker of Egypt's greatness. With her death, Egypt became a province of Rome, and the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander the Great, was extinguished. The emotional impact of Cleopatra's downfall is immense. Her life had been defined by ambition, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of her kingdom. But in the end, Cleopatra's story is one of tragic inevitability. Despite her political genius, her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and her efforts to maintain Egypt's sovereignty, she could not escape the juggernaut of Roman expansion. In her final act, Cleopatra chose to die a queen rather than live as a captive, a decision that would forever immortalize her as one of history's most fascinating and complex figures. Cleopatra's fall also symbolized the shift from the ancient world to the Roman Empire. With her death, Rome's dominance over the Mediterranean was absolute, and Octavian would soon become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The world of the pharaohs, with its temples, gods, and ancient traditions, was subsumed into the machinery of Roman rule. Cleopatra's legacy, however, would live on, not just as the last pharaoh of Egypt, but as a figure of enduring mystery, strength, and tragic beauty. The emotional climax of Cleopatra's story resonates through the ages. Her life and death continue to captivate historians, artists, and storytellers. She is remembered as a woman who lived on her own terms, ruled a great kingdom with wisdom and power, and faced her inevitable defeat with grace and dignity. Cleopatra's tragic end is not merely the conclusion of her story but the final curtain on the ancient world she fought so hard to protect. Cleopatra's legacy transcends time, her influence reverberating through the centuries as both a historical figure and a symbol of power, intelligence, and intrigue. In modern history, she has become an enduring icon, immortalized in countless works of art, literature, film, and theater. From Shakespeare's play Antony and Cleopatra to Hollywood's grand depiction of her life in the 1963 film starring Elizabeth Taylor, Cleopatra's story has been told and retold, each interpretation adding layers to the mystique surrounding her character. Cleopatra has come to represent not just the end of an ancient empire, but the powerful allure of a woman who defied the conventions of her time. In popular culture, Cleopatra is often depicted as the quintessential femme fatale, a woman who used her beauty and charm to seduce and manipulate the most powerful men of her time. However, modern scholarship has begun to paint a more nuanced picture of her as a highly skilled politician and diplomat who wielded not only her physical appeal but also her intellect and strategic acumen to protect her kingdom and ensure its prosperity. Cleopatra's lasting impact on modern history is her dual image, as both a shrewd ruler and a symbol of feminine power in a male-dominated world. She challenges our perceptions of leadership and the role of women in power, making her a figure who continues to inspire both admiration and debate. Moreover, Cleopatra's story is not confined to the annals of ancient history. It has become a symbol for those who fight against the odds, who navigate the complexities of political power, and who defy expectations. Her ability to use her resources and alliances strategically is a testament to her resilience, a quality that resonates deeply in modern narratives of survival, ambition, and strength. Politically, Cleopatra's reign marked the end of Egypt's independence, as her kingdom was absorbed into the Roman Empire following her defeat. The annexation of Egypt under Roman rule was a monumental shift in the history of both nations. For Egypt, it meant the end of over 3,000 years of pharaonic rule, as its wealth and resources were now exploited to fuel the expansion of Rome. But while the Ptolemaic dynasty ended with Cleopatra, her reign left behind vital political lessons. Cleopatra's life and reign exemplify the complexities of political power, particularly the balancing act between ambition and survival. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not mere romantic entanglements but calculated political maneuvers aimed at securing Egypt's independence in the face of Rome's growing dominance. Through her efforts, Cleopatra delayed the inevitable annexation of Egypt by nearly 2 decades. Her reign teaches us about the importance of political alliances, strategic foresight, and adaptability in the face of overwhelming odds. Cleopatra's downfall, however, also serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of power. Despite her formidable intellect and tactical brilliance, she ultimately could not resist the might of Rome, a reminder of how even the most powerful rulers are vulnerable to the larger forces of history. Yet, her refusal to submit to humiliation and defeat, choosing instead to take her own life, stands as a final act of defiance, symbolizing her unyielding spirit. Cleopatra's legacy is one of resistance. She was a monarch who fought to the very end to preserve the sovereignty of her nation, even as the tides of history swept against her. This lesson, of standing firm against seemingly insurmountable forces, continues to resonate with modern leaders and activists alike. In the end, Cleopatra remains a figure who transcends time, her life a blend of myth and history that continues to captivate and inspire. She is remembered not just as the last pharaoh of Egypt, but as a symbol of power, ambition, and resilience. Her story resonates across generations because it touches on universal themes: the pursuit of power, the complexities of leadership, and the struggle to maintain control in the face of overwhelming odds. Cleopatra's ability to navigate the dangerous world of Roman politics, her strategic alliances, and her refusal to be reduced to a mere pawn in the hands of powerful men make her one of history's most fascinating figures. Her defiance in the face of defeat, choosing death over dishonor, adds a layer of tragic heroism to her story, further elevating her as a symbol of resistance and dignity. Today, Cleopatra's legacy is visible in the way we understand leadership, particularly female leadership. She has come to represent the struggle for agency in a male-dominated world, and her life is a testament to the complexities of ruling as a woman in a patriarchal society. Cleopatra inspires not only because of her beauty or her romantic liaisons, but because she was a woman who fought fiercely for her people and her country. As we reflect on Cleopatra's life and legacy, we are reminded that history is not just about the events that shape nations but about the individuals who leave an indelible mark on the world. Cleopatra's story is one of those rare narratives where the past continues to echo in the present, her name still evoking images of power, mystery, and tragedy. In her, we see a ruler who transcended the limitations of her time and whose influence endures, reminding us of the timeless struggle for power, freedom, and legacy. Throughout Cleopatra's life, mysteries and legends have swirled around her reign, as well as the broader history of Egypt, adding layers of intrigue and fascination that endure to this day. One of the most compelling aspects of ancient Egypt is the enigma surrounding the construction of the pyramids, which predates Cleopatra by over 2,000 years. While Cleopatra did not oversee the construction of these monuments, her reign saw a deep reverence for Egypt's ancient past, and she took active steps to preserve and honor the country's cultural heritage. Under her rule, Cleopatra restored several temples, including those dedicated to Egyptian gods such as Osiris and Isis, emphasizing her connection to the ancient religious traditions of Egypt. While her Greek Ptolemaic lineage might have distanced her from native Egyptian culture, Cleopatra embraced the role of pharaoh in a way that few of her predecessors had. She adopted traditional Egyptian symbols and deified herself as a reincarnation of the goddess Isis, seeking to connect her reign with Egypt's grand and mysterious past. She understood that the preservation of these ancient symbols and temples was crucial not only for the continuity of Egyptian culture but also for consolidating her own power. By portraying herself as a restorer of Egypt's glorious history, Cleopatra aimed to strengthen her legitimacy and endear herself to the Egyptian people. Another source of endless curiosity is Cleopatra's relationships with two of the most powerful men in the ancient world, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her involvement with Caesar began in 48 BC after she famously had herself smuggled into his quarters rolled in a carpet. This bold act is often seen as one of Cleopatra's most daring moves, capturing Caesar's attention and securing her position on the throne. Their relationship was not only romantic but also politically strategic. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, whom she hoped would secure Egypt's future by linking it to the Roman Republic's most powerful family. However, after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra's political calculations shifted, and she formed a new alliance with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most trusted generals. Their relationship has been the subject of much speculation and romanticism. Was it purely a political alliance? Or was it a genuine love affair that grew out of shared ambition? The answer likely lies somewhere in between. Together, they envisioned an empire that could challenge Octavian and unite the East and West, but their dream crumbled with their defeat at the Battle of Actium. Their relationship, marked by grandeur and tragedy, continues to captivate historians and artists alike, blending the lines between historical fact and mythic romance. Cleopatra's involvement with these two iconic figures not only shaped her personal story but also altered the course of world history. Her ability to form alliances through both diplomacy and personal relationships highlights her political acumen. Cleopatra's life was filled with such intriguing moments, stories that seem almost too dramatic to be real, yet they are woven into the fabric of historical truth. These curiosities about Cleopatra's life, her strategic relationships, and her role in preserving Egypt's ancient heritage continue to make her one of the most enigmatic figures in history. If you've been captivated by the incredible story of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt and one of the most complex figures in history, there's so much more to explore. Dive deeper into the fascinating lives of other iconic figures and pivotal events from the ancient world. From the secrets of the pyramids to the legendary exploits of Alexander the Great and the rise of the Roman Empire, our channel is your gateway to uncovering the mysteries of the past. Be sure to check out our other videos, where we delve into the untold stories of historical figures like Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Octavian. Learn how their lives intertwined with Cleopatra's, and discover the political intrigue, personal ambitions, and monumental decisions that shaped the ancient world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth content about history's most fascinating characters and events. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss a new upload, whether it's about the wonders of ancient Egypt, the military strategies of Rome, or the philosophical debates of ancient Greece. Join us on this journey through time, and let's continue to unravel the stories that have shaped human civilization for thousands of years.